Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I know for a summer service, there's a lot going on here this evening, so we appreciate you being here when I know the beach and other things call at people. I also want to acknowledge that this has been a particularly difficult week for some people for very personal, familial reasons, and for other people because of the things that have happened in our area during this past week. So we really do hold you all in our hearts and understand that this is very difficult for a lot of you. I theoretically have a few more days of sabbatical left, but I thought it was important while the information was fresh. I'm just home a few days that I come and report back to you about what I was seeing, what I was feeling, what I was perceiving in my days in Israel, our days in Israel. You know, in our family, we don't need a lot of an excuse to get to Israel. I think you probably have figured that out about me already over these last 19 years, but especially over these last 22 months. But there was a particular urge that became urgent to our family, specifically this summer. You see, this was supposed to be, for Lauren and me, our dream summer. What does that mean? The two of us, because of her work and my sabbatical, were supposed to be in Israel with all three kids, but we were not going to be responsible for any of the kids, as they were going to be on program. So what could be better than to be together there and not be responsible for our children? Well, we know that we plan and God laughs, and we obviously know what happened with Iran and the conflict, the war that took place. And we promised each other, and we told our people in Israel that as soon as airspace opened, we would be there. And we were. And this leads to what I would say, and with this I could sit down. I won't. But with this, I could sit down to say that I got there on a Thursday. You know, Ella was the only game in town, so you had to do whatever they told you were going to do. So I got there on a Thursday, Lauren got there on a Friday, and Talia, the only one of our children who was able to come, came with her best friend to start the Diller program, but came a few days early. Lauren and I got to Ben Gurion to pick the girls up. And we got a call from their Israeli friends, their exchange students. The girls would come here, now they were going there. They said, do you mind if we come to the airport and receive the girls with you? We said, how lovely. We got there, as you could imagine, the girls had signs and balloons for our girls to receive them. And Shira, who was the girl that stayed with us for almost 2 weeks, looked at Lauren and said, you're here. And Lauren said, of course we're here. And she said, during the war you wrote to us and said that as soon as airspace opens, we're with you and we're going to be there. And Lauren said, yes. And she said, but you actually showed up. And again, we could have gone home right then and there, because Israelis over the last 20 months have felt so lonely and so isolated for so many reasons that you all understand, that when you say to people you're with them, to show up and to hold their hands and to embrace them actually meant more than it's ever meant to me, and I've been to Israel probably over 30 times in my life. Anachnu itchem, we're with you, means more to those folks than you can ever imagine. You see, Shira and her family live in Rishon LeZion, one of the places that took direct hits from Iranian missiles. And although she said, yes, we had some windows that were blown out, that was not the full story that Shira told us in the airport that evening. The bomb and the missile hit a block away, but if there's nothing in between, 1.5 tons of ballistic missile does a lot of damage, not just where it hits, but at every place in its circumference. They were in their safe room. They thought that the blast itself had made a direct hit on their house because it shook like an earthquake, violently shook. They thought it was over. It wasn't over, obviously, but apparently, and we've heard this many times, the sensation of that blast sucks all of the air out of the safe room, and for about 10 seconds, which feels like several minutes, you can't breathe. So you really think it's over. And she said that she herself couldn't move. Her little brother was hysterically crying, and the other sibling was shaking uncontrollably. The mom holding them all saying, "We are alive," like having to say to them, to let them know that even though what they had gone through felt like the end, that they were alive. Just to shove open the safe door room, why shove it open? Because drywall and glass was every place to be seen. There was really not much left of their home, in fact. And you forget certain things that you wouldn't think about. Like, do you have shoes in the safe room? Because all I could think about is that, I can't remember now, that Bruce Willis movie called, thank you, Matter of Age, Die Hard. Do you remember him going into that section, walking through that glass? That's what people had to face. And Shira somehow became obsessed with her dog. And what did she do? She said, "You have to see this, Matt." She sat there and created and made shoes for her dog so her dog wouldn't have to walk through the glass. They came through pushing stuff away. They got outside. And then, as much as we love our homeland, there's crime in Israel like there is every place else. This has not been reported. There was mass looting every place. So the dad said, "I am staying in this home for 2 more days until it's sealed off, with a gun under one pillow and a knife under the other, just to make sure to protect his house." That's one story of what I wrote to you while I was away, of a Russian roulette nature of a war. What do I mean by that? This was the first time in Israeli history that a missile could literally hit any place in the country, any place they were. It used to be if you lived in the center of Israel, in Tel Aviv and the surrounding areas, or you lived in Jerusalem, because of course they're all holy sites for Christians, for Muslims and Jews, it wouldn't hit. But this war was the equalizer. The equalizer in the sense that every night people went to sleep, they actually thought, every single one I spoke to, this could be the night that my life ends. One of the misconceptions that many of us have of Israelis, and again, me with the numerous times that I've gone, is they have tougher skin than anyone else that you encounter. And I'm not here to say to you that I found that they weren't tough, but that Sabra outside is more deceiving than I ever thought. I learned on this trip in ways that I haven't before, and maybe it's because of the 21 months that they lived through, that Israelis right now are living on a knife's edge. Israelis right now are scared out of their wits, and they're frightened and terrified in ways that I just haven't experienced before. Let me tell you what I mean. We, Lauren and I and Talia, had 3 different times that we were called into a bomb shelter. And I will tell you embarrassingly that the first one Lauren and I slept through. So in the morning, she said, "Honey, I think we missed the alert last night," which is really hard to do. So we got the apps in our phone. But about 12 days had gone by, and you sort of forgot that this was even a possibility. So I'm at Shabbat dinner. Lauren actually had left the day before to come back home. And we're sitting around, typically having an after-dinner drink and having all kinds of delicious cakes and desserts. And suddenly the piercing sound of the phone goes off, which now gives you 15 minutes before the siren itself will go off so you can prepare. Now, I had never heard this piercing sound before because I didn't have the app living here. I suddenly watched everyone pop up, Joel and Gail's adult children, their brother and their respective spouses. And I said, "What's going on?" They said, "There could be a boom coming." That's what they call it, a boom. And I said, "Just let me know what my job is, and I will take care of whichever child you put in my hands." And they got the shelter ready. They moved the furniture out of the way. They opened the doors to the bedrooms. I said, "What now?" They said, "Now continue to drink your drink. We don't know if an alarm is coming or not." 10 minutes later, the alarm comes. This one I did not sleep through. Tseva Adom, very loud. They run upstairs and get their children, and literally, the 18-month-old gets put in my arms and says, "You're responsible for her." Into the shelter we go, things you don't think about. Unbelievable heat in the shelter, dripping of sweat. And generally, not because I'm a tough guy, I've just gotten used to this being there. I wasn't initially scared. But then I looked at every single face in the shelter. My dear friend Joel and his wife, his children, their spouses, and the grandchildren, and the neighbors next door. Joe maybe was the one that scared me the least. He looked more annoyed at this point than anything else. But watching the grandchildren look at their children, and then their children look at the grandchildren, their own kids, scared me in ways that I'd not been scared. Why? Because the kids were sitting there shaking and frightening. And I thought to myself, and this is the naive part, they've been through this for 21 months. They've been through red alerts. They've been in bomb shelters. But something happened during this Iran war that scared them in ways that make them walk around frightened. And I realized at that moment, confirmed by many others, that the Israeli right now is in a state of fear that they have not quite lived in, perhaps in the 77 years of its history. One of the things I'll tell you, Lauren and I went specifically to Petach Tikva. It was a connection through her boss. Petach Tikva also got hit badly. It was very important for us to go and help try to aid people in moving their furniture or whatever was left. A lot of you were very generous in giving me funds before I left. You should know that we bought people refrigerators, we bought people stoves, we bought people all kinds of things that unfortunately the government is just not giving them enough funds to be able to replace. So you did lots and lots of good work while you were there. But that was where we specifically went. We also wandered all the time. Wandered through the streets of Tel Aviv, and suddenly, in the middle of a residential neighborhood, there would be one whole square block missing. Like you would just see a total disaster zone from a missile that fell into, imagine the middle of Millburn, or the middle of the Upper West Side, or the middle of Livingston Center. That's what it was. Now I come back always a little bit inappropriate, I can't help it, but I'm telling you the truth. This is not me making this up. This whole square block is missing, and somehow there's one store that is not touched. Lauren's looking at me like, you're not going to do this, honey. It was a sex shop. So I looked at Lauren and I said, we're in a Jewish state. The first mitzvah of the Torah is be fruitful and multiply. And somehow that was the shop that stood there. Just the bazaar in the middle of the bazaar. The bazaar that takes away the word called shigra, routine. The routine that somehow was either a hindrance or it was a shelter. What do I mean by that? The Americans attack on a Saturday night. Within 24 hours, the war is over, that part of the war. And what does the government say? Tomorrow you go back to school, and tomorrow you go back to work. And some people said to me, how do I go back? I'm supposed to go back and teach tomorrow? I'm supposed to go back and trade stocks tomorrow? I'm supposed to go back and argue in front of a judge as a lawyer tomorrow? That's it? Nothing happened over the last 12 days? While others say it was the best thing that ever happened. I can go and act as a psychologist, as a lawyer, as a doctor, and I could pretend that none of this happened. Routine became something that was either the protector or the thing that really shook you. The routine of going down to visit now our very dear friends at Kibbutz Nir Oz, actually at Karmei Gat where they live. Nir Oz has been destroyed, as you know. We're sitting around with 6 or 7 other couples, feeling so comfortable as dear friends at this point, but still looking at all of them, knowing that each of them would sort of travel off into their traumatic journeys in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of eating a piece of steak, of drinking a glass of wine. You would literally, like a Holocaust survivor, those of us who experience them, see them go off into the trauma only to be brought back into the conversation. Well, one of the conversations was about Sagi Dekelchen. A lot of you know that name. Sagi Dekelchen, married to Avital, the one who comes back. Remember, she has a baby when he's gone. What's the baby's name? You used to joke around and say it was Mazel, so she named the kid Shach or Mazel. Ring a bell for anyone? The father's an American, a professor at Hebrew U. The mother, divorced mother of his mother, was a gardener on the kibbutz, extraordinaire. And when he was in captivity, they go on to tell us that she sort of accelerated in age by 20 years. She looked like she was 99 years old, walking down the street until he came home. He comes home and suddenly she reduces in her age by way of look. And now in the temporary home, she is gardening every single corner of this town, making it bloom, growing vegetables and flowers and all kinds of wonderful, wonderful vegetation. And one of them says, she's just doing great. Now, they're going back and forth. They're close enough to us that they don't, speak in English the whole time. Going back and forth, and all of them break out laughing. And Lauren and I are convinced that we must have missed a Hebrew phrase. What are they laughing at? So we asked them, and they started laughing and said, the fact that we use the words, she's doing great, is the biggest joke in the world. Because no matter what is going on in their lives and how used to these new lives they've become, the word great, they can't even get past as a word they can legitimately use ever again. And they laughed at it. So I can go on and on about going to Hostage Square, hearing from Eli Sharabi, the one whose his wife and his 2 daughters were killed in front of him and got out. His brother's still there. How he gets up and says, if we don't bring these hostages home, we're no longer Israeli, we're no longer Jewish, this is a social contract. Please don't let this be routine. I can tell you about Yair the butcher that I got close to over the last 3 years because his meat is unbelievable, but his soul is even sweeter. And he had a stroke because people get sick every day having nothing to do with the war, so we visited him. Our teacher, Tal, who finally found the love of her life and is getting married in the fall. To my chagrin, I can't go officiate. She had invited me to do so, but they don't let Reform rabbis do weddings in Israel in that way. But they're living regular lives in the middle of all of this terror. But I know that you also want to hear the obvious. These are all stories that I think are important. They give you the fabric of everyday Israeli life. By the way, one of the reasons I and we go so much is because I have no trust for any channel that you may think is verifiable. I don't believe any of them. Just go through the whole crowd. There's none of them I believe, because talking to people on the street and getting real life information is what is the best source of information. And anytime someone says, oh, the bunch of lefties or righties, folks, trying to take Western values and projecting them onto a Middle Eastern country, I promise you, anytime you try to do that, no offense, but you're wrong. It's just a very, very different culture and place. So let me give you what I learned from people, from the press, from talking to journalists, friends whom we have there. And here's something, you don't have to hold any of this against me. I have a little opinion here, but this is what I learned. 83% of Israelis coming out in the polls in the last 2 weeks, 83% want the war to be over. Okay, that's not right and left anymore. 83% represents practically the whole country. Question is why? So why? A, not because, by the way, that there's anyone, I don't care how left you are, who is a lover of Hamas. Not one. Not because they want Hamas to exist, they want it to be eradicated, but let's start with utter exhaustion. Israel has never fought a war that has lasted 21 months. And some soldiers that I actually know personally have fought in Gaza, they have fought in Lebanon against Hezbollah, they've been in Syria against Hezbollah, and guess what? You can now know that there were many troops that were also in Iran during this fight. Commandos that were, if America had not attacked that night, this unit that we're very close to, you've helped support, were on the plane ready to go and do the job themselves. But if you're 23 years old and you have fought for 21 months against all these enemies, you are utterly, utterly exhausted. The last day I was there, a stat came out that says 4,200 soldiers. This is not a huge army. 4,200 soldiers are in post-traumatic stress protocol because they can they're so paralyzed that if they wanted to fight, they can no longer fight. The newspapers say that they don't see that the military can do any more than they've done, and they believe right now, again, not that they want to stop the fight, but they think they need to find a diplomatic way to do that, to disarm Hamas, to expel Hamas, and to somehow bring it up, but they do not believe, and these are military leaders, that there's any more reason to actually fight the war from a military place. They have reached what I would call a Fallujah syndrome. Remember Fallujah for us? There are now, this is what I've been scared of since the beginning, there are now remnants of Hamas popping out of tunnels, shooting 3 or 4 soldiers, trying to kidnap them. We're praying for these hostages. Imagine, God forbid, there are more taken now. That's their goal. They pop back in the tunnels. They leave bleeding Israeli boys and girls, and they go on their way. And there is the humanitarian situation, which is now getting attention in the Israeli press, in Israeli conversations, about how far is it okay for us to go in order for us to achieve our goals. And no one can explain that all of those missiles that Israel sent by way of cruise missiles, through planes, to Iran, every single one was fought and sent with intention. That whole war was fought perfectly so that in 12 days it was over. Hezbollah, the walkie-talkies that blew up in people's chests, that were planted in people's washing machines to cause the kind of terror that made people scared to even wash their underwear each day, that was years of planning and years of intention. The brightest minds technologically, militarily, intellectually. And somehow the Israeli public doesn't understand, if the plans were so well put together for these 2 Darth Vader-type enemies, why isn't it the same in Hamas? And it's true, urban warfare, it's different. They're embedding amongst citizens. But the Israelis are asking the question, where is the actual plan? And there's never a plan that is presented, which leads to, and again, you could blame this on me if you're against these points of view or against these facts, but Bibi Netanyahu is now at a 70% disapproval rating. 70%. It went down a tiny bit after the brilliance of the way the war was prosecuted against Iran and against Hezbollah. But it went right back to 70%. And here's what I will add, that there is a very, very serious distrust about how he's prosecuting the war and why. And I'll leave it at that because he has done a lot well during this time. But they're concerned that this is the one place that there's no plan, and they really have lost a lot of trust. And then I'll come to the point that obviously has been the serious point of contention in the last week that I was away, which of course is the hunger issue and the famine issue. From Israeli press and conversations, there are certain things that are clear that I want you to hear, because I don't think we need to become the victims and the martyrs here. The truth is that there is proof what Hamas has done with food for 21 months. They have stolen it, they have hoarded it, they have sold it at enormous amounts of money to be able to perpetuate their own survival. They've taxed it, and they've used it as propaganda in ways that has really taken the world hook, line, and sinker along the way. Just remember that first hospital that they said Israel destroyed in week 1 of the war, only to find out that it was actually one of their own missiles that backfired, killed people, and the hospital was intact, and the New York Times put a little postscript at the end that said that. So they are outstanding at being able to take the world along that way. And it's also really hard to be able to understand when there's famine and when there's not, because of all the crying wolf that has taken place over all this time. Famine, 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 and it turns out that many of those times there was not a famine. I'm not saying people weren't hungry, but there was not the starvation that they reported. And I would say that all of us legitimately have had a blind spot for good reason when it comes to the likes of Hamas. 10/7 in 23 may feel like a really long time for us, but for Israelis, like the groups we sat in, who were missing parents, who were missing grandchildren, who knew that their sisters and mothers were raped, sorry folks, that doesn't go away in 2 seconds. That causes blind spots that all of us have. So I'm saying that we have probably missed things that subconsciously we have wanted to miss. And all you have to do as a little note is go look at how it is that hostages have been released. Remember those ceremonies of music, of attacking and spitting on people in the street. Do you remember sending back one of the wrong Bebas kids? A coffin that had a different kid in it just to torture the family? When people came out in picnics and celebrations and music and danced around the coffins? There's no reason we should feel any sense of sympathy for people of that like. But we also have to say, and Israelis are now writing about this, that with all of that complicity, that there has been complicity on the other side also as it relates to this. And here's the part that I missed, and if I missed it, I'm guessing you did also. In March, this past March, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and they're not my politicians, so I don't mind. I think they are the most disgusting type of politician that can exist. 19 years here, I probably won't get fired for that, but I'll say it again. Some of the most disgusting and heinous actors that I've ever experienced before, the two of them, did not want the hostage deal to get through because they thought it was appeasement. And they said to Bibi, if you let this happen, we need something in return. And the something in return was that aid stopped going through from March on. I don't mean all aid, enough to be able to sort of legitimize it, but a lot of the aid that was going through was stopped. And now it's July, now it's August, and it caught up. And now it went from being not enough food to not nearly being enough food. And even though they used that picture, which was not of a starving kid that we all saw, it was cerebral palsy, poor baby, the poor miskein, the poor soul. But why did they have to use it? They could have, 43 kids, Israeli papers, 43 kids died in Gaza last week from starvation. So the question is, what do we do about it? And are we able, during times of pogrom, which this is for us, during times when kids, if you haven't read about it, the youth group that was thrown off of a plane in Spain, you see that? Because they were wearing tzitzit and kippot and singing Hebrew songs, thrown off of the plane. Their youth group advisor, imagine our own Jay Asher, having his hands tied up behind his back, normalizing anti-Semitism in parts of the country which are not like that here, but it will be to a theater near you soon if we don't act. But is it possible for us to know that even in the midst of all these times, that we can still have conversations with moral discourse? Can we? Are we able to say all those things I just said about Hamas, which I believe? And I'm not in love with the citizenry there either, many of whom came through in the second wave, and the ones who raped, who pillaged, who stole, who murdered. But at the same time, does it mean that we are supposed to allow kids to die of hunger? Even if they're the ones who are more at fault, are we still supposed to allow it? I'll close, and this is a cheat, even though I went on for 20 minutes, this is a cheat. I have a lot more to say to you. But a dear friend of ours who is as secular as could be, we're sitting with him at a coffee shop, and he says, this is only in Israel, can a secular Jew have this conversation? Lauren and Matt, if God were to take your seat and sit down with me, and I were going to say, God, tell me what it is you want from me, Lauren and Matt, I could tell you exactly what God would want. I'm like, really? And he says, yeah, God would want me to be a mensch. And I know that I would have the life I want if I simply would get up and act like a mensch. Maimonides, who faced anti-Semitism much worse than any of us have seen yet, so we can't call him a lefty. Maimonides says, and would apply the rules of justice of war, that every single thing that has happened in this war has been just. However, just because it's just doesn't mean there are certain things that we actually have to do. Just because it's just doesn't mean we have to let kids die of starvation. That's Maimonides. So I will tell you that one of the great lines in Hebrew right now being used, it goes Am HaNetzach. It goes on a little bit longer. It's been such a line that has been so important to people that they're writing them on buildings, they're getting them tattooed to their ankles. And it means that we are a people of eternity that know long war and no long battle. But we are a people of resilience and hope. And on those long battles, somehow we figure out how to get to the other side. This Sunday, as Rabbi Ellenson said, is Tisha B'Av, the commemoration of all these horrible things that have happened to us, have befallen us. It's the only day of the year that's a regular day, meaning weekday, where you're not supposed to wear a talit or wrap tefillin. So, sorry, Jeff, I know you wear tefillin every day, but you don't have to do it on Sunday. So you don't do it in the morning, but you actually then wrap it in the afternoon and put a talit on in the afternoon, because at the end of this horrible day of mourning, we still believe somehow through it all, despite it all, that we're going to wrap ourselves with a talit and put on tefillin because hashivenu, because we're going to renew our days as of old. And no matter how bad things are, we believe that they can get better. So last night I go to sleep, and always, you know me, since COVID, I always look for one positive article, just one, before I go to sleep at night. And last night something pops up that I thought was a dream. That the Arab League, did you see this? The Arab League got together and said, Hamas is responsible for October 7th, fully responsible. They should be disarmed and expelled from the territory. And then the Arab League itself together should come together to find a way to create a Palestinian state with people who want to make peace with Israel. Now, that last piece is really hard. I've said this before. No more am I going with water and borders first. I'm going with Arab Zionism first. So I know it's not 2 seconds. I woke up this morning. Matt Turk was driving back from a gig. He slept over. We had breakfast in the morning. He said, "Did you see in the paper?" And I said, "It wasn't a dream?" He said, No, this really happened. So maybe on Tisha B'Av, we can put on our tefillin and we can wrap ourselves with a talit in the afternoon, because we believe that even in the middle of this terror, even in the middle of this pogrom, even in the middle of this peace where we have to do a moral accounting because we do have pieces of this that we own at this point, that's what a 2-year war does, that somehow Am HaNetzach, that there's a path of eternity that somehow could lead to a sense of redemption and a sense of hope and a sense of a better tomorrow. Because I don't go there to be depressed. I come back, everyone says, "Boy, you look great." And the reason I look great in such a complicated place is because the truth is deep, it's scary, and it's replete with hope. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
So in an attempt to capture some of that joy and that hope